So the topic for today is Power BI governance, which we are going to talk about for the next 20-25 minutes. And then we're going to hopefully have some discussion and or questions if you have some. So my name is Asgeir. I'm a data platform MVP. I own a consultancy with myself. I'm the sole employee of it. It's called North Insights. I've been going solo for just a couple of months now. I've been working with BI since 2007, working with Power BI since it came out, and before that, Power Query, Power Pivot, all these different things. I am the leader of the Icelandic Power BI user group and also the Icelandic PAS group, which is a SQL Server user group. I come from a background of doing Microsoft BI for many, many years. So I did all the SQL Server, data warehousing, analysis services, reporting services, integration services, all these different things. But I've been doing a lot of Power BI in the last couple of years. It's so popular at the moment. I have some contact details on the slide here. You can send me an email, find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm probably most responsive on Twitter, but I do answer emails, although it might take a little bit longer. Okay, that out of the way. So we are going to talk about governance, but we're not going to maybe talk about it in the same way as you most often see Power BI presentations about governance. Because what I want to talk about is the way to look at governance from a non-technical perspective. So how do you do governance? Not necessarily how do you implement the technical part of it, but what should you be thinking when you're doing governance in Power BI? And I have come up with this 4 pillars of governance. You might disagree. I would love to hear if you disagree or if you think something is missing, or if you agree with it, we'd love to hear something about it. So in my version of it, you have one pillar, it's processes. It's probably one of the most important one. It's the backbone of your good governance strategy. It will tell different things about how you should work with Power BI. And now in many organizations, people don't like the word processes, and that's fine. You can call it something else. You can call it a best practice documentation, or whatever gets people working with it. The next pillar is training. I do a lot of Power BI training myself. I see how important Power BI training is, and I think it is very, very important, both from a governance perspective, but also just from a usability. And I will get more into why I think Power BI should be training should be a big part of your governance strategy. And monitoring, it's a huge part of it. It's probably probably the biggest challenge with doing Power BI governance is you need to monitor what's going on, and you need to somehow use the data you get from the monitoring to make sure that people are compliant, and then everything is as it's supposed to be. And then the last pillar is roles, and that's basically it's a small pillar, it's a small thing, but it's still very important if you want to have compliant, governed platform. You need to somehow set roles, set people into roles so they can fulfill them. But first, if you have if you're thinking about Power BI governance, and if you want to talk about if you want to look at the technical part of it, you should definitely follow this link here. It will take you to this website, which is the official website from Microsoft about governance and deployment approaches. And basically what this one does, it will give you a link to this fantastic deployment enterprise deployment white paper written by Megan Longoria and by Melissa Coates and Chris Webb. And it is a great document. It is 259 pages, but it's a fantastic document about how to do enterprise Power BI. So all the technical bits, how do you do deployment pipelines, how do you do security and all these different things. So this is where you go for technical stuff. The only thing it does not have maybe is how you definitely should do monitoring, but otherwise, it will do a lot of the other stuff. So that out of the way, now I want to talk about the methods and talk about why you should be doing and how you should be applying this governance strategy to your Power BI implementation. So first thing is the process. And as I said before, it's the backbone of your governance strategy. You will have most likely have more than one process. We probably won't have one huge process. You will have smaller processes. You might have a development process, publishing, sharing, security, naming standards, support, and tenant setting. Those are the ones I have put front as the one that you should definitely be thinking about. And those might not be separate processes. They might be, so publishing and sharing might be a single process. Naming standards and publishing and sharing might be also just one process. So there are different different ways to present this, but I think these are a bit you should be thinking about when you're doing processes for your development for your governance strategy. And it's very important to have those processes because it can very fast become a wild west when you're working with Power BI. People creating all kind of different workspaces, and they are developing Power BI in different ways, and they are calling things differently, and they are sharing things in the way they shouldn't be sharing. So having those processes in place will help you a lot with your implementation. And in my experience, people are not so business developers are not against having those documents, having some documents to work with. Many people fear this. So when I have done this with our companies, some people fear like, I don't want to put some more burdens on them. They are doing really good by just producing something on their own. But there's often this insecurity with people when they're creating something in Power BI. They're not sure how to do things. And if you have a documentation of how to do things, and I think most people just appreciate it and like it. So I have a slide on each one of these processes, and I want to talk about what you should contain in them and why you should have them. So first one is the development process, and you might think why do I need a development process for my business users and my BI developers? They know what they're doing. But what I tend to find is that there are more than one ways, for example, to develop Power BI content. You can do it in Power BI Desktop, or you can do it in the Power BI service. You might have a preference for how you want it to be done. For example, if you want your data, your Power BI Desktop files to go into some kind of version control, you cannot have people doing things in Power BI service. And so, so there could be some preferences that you have, and then, you would describe them in a document like this. So where do you develop the content? I always recommend that people do it in Power BI Desktop because you have the full capability there, and it's much easier to have a backup of files and stuff like that. And then a very, very important one is how and where to store Power BI Desktop files. People just store them on My Documents or whatever. That's normal how you do it. But you might also have a preference for people to store them in either a more secure way or even a more way which allows for version control or source control. What I often recommend, for example, is that you have a workspace and you have a OneDrive for Business or something like that that is connected to it, and you instruct your users to put the Power BI Desktop files into those OneDrive for Business or whatever it is. If you do stuff like that, if someone needs to assist, for example, a support organization or your BI developers need to assist a business user, they know where the source files are. If a person stops and they leave the company, you know where the source files are. Of course, you can download them from Power BI service and you can do things with them. But if you need more than one version of it, then that will help you a lot. Also, things like OneDrive for Business will give you a free version control. You don't have to have a source control system. Of course, you need to be aware of that. It might take a lot of space. If you have a 100 megabyte file and you save it every day in OneDrive for Business, or maybe even multiple times a day, it will take a lot of space in the end. So you need to manage that as well. Also, you wouldn't describe in this when should you split report and data set from each other. So when do you just create a data set, publish that, and create reports on that with from Power BI service as a source, and when do you not do that? You will have information about branding and development support material that people need. You might split this one into a different process for the BI professionals and business people, but you might not. So the main content is exactly the same, but you will you might have some differences depending on who it is. For example, BA professionals, you might require them to use source control, and you might require them to have comments when they check things into source control, which is probably something you would not do with business people, because it is a big requirement for people who don't know how to work with source control systems. Okay, that was the development process. Now, next one is the publishing process. So as I said before, publishing and sharing, those two processes might be in one document, or it might also include other parts of this, but I just want to split it up just because it's easier to explain that. Publishing process, of course, is relevant to anyone who needs to publish. You don't want your users to be working in Power BI Desktop and not publishing to the service, because if they're just working in Power BI Desktop, it can be a security issue. A publishing process will include information of how to set up app workspaces. So if you allow people to create workspaces, it will talk about that. If you don't allow them to create workspaces, it will tell them how to ask for one, and what the process is about. How do you get a workspace? And then it will just talk about how and when to publish reports and data sets. So it's a simple process, but it will still help people, especially if you don't allow people to create their own workspaces. And even if you do, it will help them do it correctly. A sharing process is a little bit, so I say it will often be together with the publishing, because it's usually the same person, but it's not always. And if you're in a bigger organization, a sharing might be done by a workspace owner that it owns the production workspace, but maybe not the development, or so you might have a developer that is developing something for the development workspace, but then when it gets promoted through it, his developer might not even have access. So it depends a little bit on how you set up what the audience for these processes, but it will include normally a description of the 4 different sharing methods, and tell people when it's acceptable to use it. So you might have a policy that says we will always share Power BI reports and data sets through an app. We will just always do that, and then that's simple. It will be described here. But you might also say that in certain circumstances I will allow a direct sharing, or maybe not allow. It's appropriate to do direct sharing. In certain circumstances, you can just give people access to the workspace and everyone is happy. So you want to describe those, and you want to talk about it, and then you want to say people how and when to use it, because it is not obvious necessarily to an inexperienced user of sharing a report. They will automatically go to the share button, and when if you would rather them to be using apps, then you need to tell them that. It will of course reference a security process, because sharing is a security matter very often. That's why you want to do most often why you want to do a certain way of sharing things. Okay. Security process. It will simply tell you about everything about security. It's pretty simple. It will be split into 2 things normally: a data security and object security. So you will normally have it, it's the same document, but they have 2 sections at least. And of course, it will contain references to any kind of standards you need to follow. If you need to follow, GDPR or any kind of industry standards, you will reference them so people know how to, be compliant. And then, if you have, you will have a section on object security, and it will, describe, when do you want to secure, how do you secure the Power BI desktop file, the workspaces and the apps and the data sets and reports and dashboards. And it will also have a section, or it will be a separate one on the on-premise on-premise gateway connection. You will want to tell people how to secure connections there, and how to ask for a permission to use the on-premise gateway connection. It isn't, it's not strictly speaking an object, but it's still a connection that you are allowed to use. And also, this one would talk about Active Directory groups, when should you use them, and how to get them. And even if you have, if you want to, you can include a section here about data refresh. And if you want to have, if you want to have specific users, service users or something like that to use to do refreshes, you will describe how to apply for one and how to set it up. And then data security process will talk about role level security, but it will also talk about when can you use data source security, so analysis services, SAP, BW, and directory. There are a few things, a few systems that will allow you to do pass-through security. When should you use that? And when do you use Power BI role level security? And then, a difference between a static and dynamic role level security, and even preferably a reference to how to documents as well, because this is a little bit complex topic sometimes. This one is a little fun one, naming standard process. This is the one I feel like I have not had one customer that has had control over naming standards. No matter what I say and what I try to do, this is something that is really, really, really hard to do and to follow up on. But it will help you a lot if you have this under control. So having a naming standard from start is best. If you don't have it from start, having it from someplace is always better than not having it. You might have a corporate naming standard in IT, but you also might not have it. And then setting yourself a naming standard would be fantastic. So how to name your objects? If you have, if you're a Power BI Pro user and you don't have a, Power BI Premium, don't have deployment pipelines, you might have a development, test, and production workspace, and just name the workspaces, dev, test, and prod or something like that. Should that be, before the name or after the name? So post or pre, or how do you want to do this? You should describe this so you don't get a mess of workspaces. You might have hundreds or thousands of workspaces, and if there's no naming standards, it's going to be hard to do any kind of proper monitoring on it. And also just how to change names of objects after creations, and if you have a corporate naming standards where it is. And this one is a support process. So in my experience, a lot of organizations that I work with have a support organization. So they have a help desk or whatever you call it, but they usually don't know anything about Power BI. But having some kind of a process in place that allows them to either pass it on or to solve some of the simpler ones, it will help you a lot, because your users are going to be more happy if they don't have to wait a lot. Because what I've seen in some organizations is that tickets get created on the on the queue, and then they just sit there because nobody knows what to do with them. So teaching the support people, how to figure out who owns the report or data dashboard or data set or whatever it is, and then how to pass the ticket to them is gonna, it's gonna be great for you if you can make that happen, because it will, help the, shorten the turnaround time of tickets. And as I say, they can often do some of the more simpler things on the help desk. Then this one is a little process, or I don't know if you could call it a process, but what I see is that, you have in your Power BI tenant settings, you have, something like 40 settings. You can monitor if they get changed, but you can only monitor what they got changed to, but not what they got changed from. So what I recommend is that you have a document describing all the different settings and how they should be set. Especially if you have more than one administrator. If you have more than one administrator, you definitely want to do this. And then you can, if something gets changed, you can see that in the in the audit log, and then you can say, okay, it got changed from this to this. Was it approved change or not? And then if it wasn't approved, you know what to set it back to. You don't have to figure that out again because you have it written down. And the next pillar is training. So the second pillar is training. Training is very, very important. You want to train people to use the tools, to use Power BI, but you also want to train them in the governance strategy. So where the documents, how to use them, what kind of industry standards do we need to follow, and all these different things. And my philosophy is you should train everyone, not just the developers, but you should have tailored training based on roles. So for developers, might have either in-person training or online training or video training or whatever you choose. But then you have consumers, you want to train them as well. But you should have, you don't have to have a classroom training for consumers, but you might want to have some kind of videos on, how to navigate the Power BI service, how and when you can share and download and export all these different things which are important for governance. You want to have videos, short videos or something on those, or documents describing it, and you want to let people know of these type of training. You want to find the right delivery method, as I said. So I would, suggest, classroom training or online training for the developers, but some videos, short videos for the consumers. I have been experimenting a bit with, some automated the offering of training by using Power Automate or any kind of other, workflow tool. You can query the Office 365 API to see who has license. So if a person has a license, Power BI Pro license or Power BI free license, you can send them an email saying, hey, now I can see you have a Pro license or you have a free license. You should take a look at these documents here. This is the same, of course, you can do the same with the process documents, to send them to people when they get the, first start. And then you have the audit log, which, if someone creates something, you might want to, tag them for a developer training, especially if you have it, as a video courses or something like that, or even if you, have regular in-person courses, just tell them where to sign up, so that, they can do things right. So, well, the reason why I think this is really, really important is that, if you have properly trained people, they will most likely not accidentally breach governance. So they're gonna be compliant, unless, of course, they wanna, if it's on purpose, of course, it's hard to stop that. Someone can breach, compliance, on purpose, that, if they're trained or not. But if they're well trained, they're probably not gonna do it accidentally. Okay, that was training. And then monitoring. Monitoring is probably one of my favorite part of Power BI governance, because it's so technical. You can just sit down and you can do something about it. But it's very, very important. You want to use the Power BI API to create and maintain an artifact inventory. From a governance perspective, it will tell you what exists. And it will tell you, how that's developing over time. It will not only help you with governance, but it will also help you with just, supporting your implementation. And I like to, add some metadata to this. So what I sometimes do is, you create some kind of you ask, when someone creates a new artifact, like a Power BI report, you can ask them for some, additional data. So what is, the purpose of this? What is, what is the confidentiality of this? And if you add those data to it, then you can have a really nice inventory that is really important for governance perspective. And then, of course, the most important one is the Power BI audit log. You want to monitor all the activity for governance issue or adoption. If you don't use the audit log, you cannot say if people are compliant or not. So you simply have to get it. And if you go through Office 365, you can, it's stored for 90 days. But if you want to get the audit log through the Power BI service, it's stored for 30 days. So if you're not downloading it and putting it into a database or, even file system somewhere, it is, going to be lost after 30 days or 90 days, depending on where you get it. So go and get it, because otherwise you cannot prove or disprove anything. And in my opinion, you want to use this monitoring and you want to report on the results. You want to show people what, how it's going and, how compliant you are, because that's going to help you with the implementation. It's going to help you with credibility, and it might even help you with funding for Power BI. The last part of this method, last pillar, is the roles part. And as I said, I feel it's very important to have well-defined roles, because what I often find in organizations that I go to is that, there is a Power BI administrator, there is a gateway administrator, there is an auditor and supporters, and there is data stewards over there. They're not strictly Power BI related, but they are something that, might be interesting in a Power BI perspective. But there are all these different, roles that are out there, and people have those roles, but because it's not official roles, they don't get any kind of time allocation for it. So you're a Power BI administrator. I was a Power BI administrator before when I used to work for an organization, and then, you don't have an official, hat on. So you're just supposed to do this on top of your normal work. But if you recognize this as a role, and it's not a full-time employee, this is just a role that you have, alongside or your other role you have, often at least, But if you have that role, if it's officially acknowledged, you might have some allocation for it, and then you're going to do it well. Because if you expect people to do these roles, without having any kind of allocation, that's going to lead to governance issues and maybe even some compliance issues. Okay, so that was my method for Power BI governance on the soft side, which is not technical. I hope some of you found this interesting, and I think we can now talk about if anyone has questions or want to do a discussion on this.
Yeah, so everybody feel free to ask.
I know it was pretty fast. We had don't have a long time. So if you have something you want to clarify, just ask for that as well.
Yeah, we have one question from I don't know how to pronounce this name, Varela Chewy. So
yes, Chewy.
Chewy. Okay, so hi Chewy.
How is everybody doing? Thank you for the presentation. Very, very insightful. I got very good notes. I guess the question, or somehow combination between question and comment that I have is, in the organization that I work for, we have somehow a small team for doing the administration of Power BI. But one of the topics that you mentioned that got me wondering a lot is the training and the support. The company that I'm working for now, I'm new in here, like 6 months, just for now. But the decision to, embrace and use Power BI officially was decided before I joined the company. So one of the decisions they made was not training. IT is not going to provide training for Power BI because they went by the assumption that, this is a SaaS product. And it's supposed to be like you can learn it in your own. And I think they got the reference that before they use, and they still do, they got a Spotfire. And with that tool or platform, they really did the training for users. So my question will be, for training, how could be a good way to justify and say, training for Power BI is still needed? I mean, I see you point out some good justifications, but how do we put that in front of people that, they put the money on the table and say, yep, let's get Power BI. How can be a good way to justify it?
I would actually use governance as a good way to do it. So I would talk about compliance and talk about how risks of exporting or not securing things correctly. I would talk about these things because these are the things that scare them into paying. But of course performance as well, especially if you have executive users. Then performance of reports and dashboards is going to be much better if you have trained users.
Right.
And then I don't know. Of course, just effective. How effective are you? How you get what you pay for. If you have people doing it on learning on their own, they are going to be doing things. I wouldn't say wrongly, but not most effectively for a long time. They will learn in the end, but it's going to cost the company a lot. Because it's going to cost them time, So these are the time is money, and then risk is also money. So I would talk about take these two things, into as the most powerful ways to get it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next one, Jochen, you raised your hand, so
yeah. Yeah, first on the trainings part, I can absolutely confirm that. So training is so important, and I found there are at least two perspectives on the training. So the one is training for the tool set to be efficient when working with the tool, and also very important training on the content. So an example, we just a few weeks ago we rolled out a sales dashboard for 200 sales reps. These are guys which are not every day working on the PC, and when the report is very complex, it was really good to see how many questions were raised when we talked about the content itself and explained the KPIs and the origins for that KPIs. And without that, yeah, you lose what you have done regarding efficiency and productivity. And I think you can even measure that if you look about what actions the people do then based on the insights they get from the report. And so absolute pro for training.
And just to add to that as well, I think that from a training point of view, it really helps drive adoption as well.
Yeah.
So, if you're creating, like you say, you created a dashboard for 200 sales reps, you want to make sure that those guys are capable to use it and they will continue to use it and they won't go back to the old methods of however they used to get that data before, whether it was Excel or whatever. So from an adoption point of view, training is really also important as well. I've found that so far anyway in the organization I work for.
Yeah, and these training doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be like I say, it's no, you don't want to fly 250 people to the same place in the classroom. It's just an online session where you help and navigate through it and answer questions. So investment is not very big either.
Yeah.
So in the end user, training is normally not a big investment.
I have another question regarding the security. How did you manage the security for the gateway usage scenarios? So we have again that project I talked about, where we have a lot of people publishing to workspaces, but we don't allow them to configure the gateway connection after publish, because if we do so, I found no way to limit the permissions. If they have gateway permissions, they have it all, and they can do whatever they want. Did you found any workaround or process working for that?
So the what I suggest in those scenarios, if because you're absolutely true that either you have access to the connection or you don't have access to the connection, and the connection is to the database, not to a specific view or anything like that. So what I suggest in these scenarios is to use multiple workspaces, so that you as a developer, you publish to one workspace, and then that gets promoted to another workspace which has a person in charge which has access to the gateway.
Yeah, but with that you need multiple gateways, no? So the issue is not really about the data source, but the gateway itself.
Well, you don't really. So if you have few people that you can call them publishers. They have access to the gateway connections, and they are not the developers of Power BI content necessarily. So they will have the control over the production workspaces, which they will promote things from other workspaces to those production workspaces, and they will have access to the connection. And that might be only one gateway, or that might be multiple gateway, or a gateway cluster, or whatever you want. But that's really the only way you can do this if you want to contain this to a specific group of people that can do it.
Yeah.
Or the other way around would be to have a person who has access to all the access to the gateway connections. They would need to be injected or input into all the workspaces. Then they need to go into every single workspace and configure the gateway. And that's a big ask to allow people to do it. You can do this via the API as well, but that you need to program something.
Yeah, sure.
But there's no good way. There's no way to limit the gateway connection to a specific, data set or view in a SQL database or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we have more questions. Nobody else? We have also a question in the chat. What is your preferred naming standard?
Oh, so there, that is really hard to say because it depends a lot on the organization. So my preference, if you are doing the Power BI Pro where you have, if you have multiple workspaces, dev workspace and test workspace and all those, I recommend putting this, as a I would put it in front of it, or I put it in the back and then use icons to differentiate, if it's a development or a test workspace. The problem with the workspace naming is the length. You only see certain amount. It's a little bit better now with a new look. So now you see, I think, 25 characters. But if your workspace has more than that, you cannot see the whole thing. You need to hover over it. So somehow make it in a way that you can read the important parts. And for reports, that is an even more difficult one, because that depends on content and organizational habits and stuff like that. What you want to do is that you want to make sure that your sales organization doesn't create a workspace called sales, and it's less important at the moment because of the new workspaces. But if you allow people to create the old workspaces, it can actually be quite dangerous. Because I was in one organization where someone created a workspace called CEO, and that created a email group that was called CEO at this organization.com, and that can actually, and you can create a workspace in the name of the CEO as well, and then you can get emails, trick people, and it can be a bit dangerous. But with the new workspaces, it's much more easier. But the important thing is you have one. I don't have a favorite, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. So we have other questions. Don't be shy. Ask.
Anyone else has any comments on the naming standards? Is anyone a question here? Is there anyone out there that has in an organization that has a good naming standard?
No.
No. I haven't been to an organization that has one yet.
Most environments are historical grown because of the V2 workspaces not existent. So everywhere I have environments, I see the homegrown or user created workspaces, and to catch that into a new naming standard is very hard to manage in an existing environment. Of course, if you start from scratch, you could do it better.
I even have one client which is, they don't allow people to do workspaces themselves, but it's still a mess. So, because they didn't think about it before they started. It is a mess.
Asgeir. For me, the naming standards in part of development, you often see that the developer uses the dim prefix and the fact prefix. I try to leave that for now, because I think there should be more the business object name without the prefix. Yep. And I always try to use or if I create a table, which normally is a dim table, I try to have one attribute or one column which represents the business key and have the same name like the table. So if you have the salesperson table, that is one column there, which is the business key, and this column should name salesperson. And if I have a customer table, there's one column which called customer, and there's a business key for the customer. This is something I try to use.
Yeah, it's incredibly important to use human readable names in the data model. But this is the dim and fact and all that. This is I'm be a developer for a profession, and this is a hard habit to kick. It's so but I think I managed to do it, but a lot of people just they keep it. And also I think this is also a training matter as well, because you have, when you are connecting to data sources and you put them into Power BI import or a directory, you will just many people just use whatever comes in. The query is going to be called query 2, and the sheet 1, and then the columns are going to be called whatever they are. And people find this okay because they know their Excel source very well, but then they publish it, and then other people need to look at it, and then it starts getting complicated. But again, this is I think a training matter as well.
But I think that's okay for one-time shot solutions. No? So
Yes.
you have to look at the life cycle. If you really want to scale out a solution, you have to take it as a professional and maybe in the worst case rebuild it to make it better. But yeah, it costs also time if you do really the BI track here and don't make fast queries without perfect star models and so on. And yeah, but you said it's also training thing.
Yeah, of course. You know, if it's an ad hoc, you know, the boss has this question, I need to answer it, and it's gonna survive for a month or two. Then
Sure.
you don't need to be but it's still if someone needs to work more on it, someone else than you, then you need to have at least some standards in there.
Okay, we'll get a next question from Chewy.
Yes, quick question. When we talk about support, would you say that people that takes care of the administration of Power BI, mainly about settings on the tenant or something that has to do with the gateway installation, getting the latest version updated and all that group of people do you think that they will be also providing the regular support for Power BI, like somehow similar to what a level 2 support schema will be, or do you see those two duties separate?
Well, so normally I see them separated, but it depends a little bit because in some organizations the best Power BI person is just set as a Power BI administrator, just because they're good at developing Power BI, and in those cases they might also do support as well. But ideally you would have it separated. You have a person that is responsible for the tenant settings. There might be the same person who is responsible for the gateway, or it might not. And they don't necessarily have any kind of a development, skills in Power BI. But they just need to understand the environment, and they might have some capacity, administrations as well. But in practice, I think it's often the same person. And it's often the same, but ideally, I wouldn't want it to be like that.
And what we've done is, I guess it's loosely linked to training, maybe. So we've created an internal Power BI community, which we've just got in Teams. So a lot of people kind of ask questions in there about fairly straightforward. How do I do this? What's the best way to do that? A lot of other business users are answering the questions before we even get to them. So that's kind of something to consider as well. And that sharing of knowledge is only going to come out of training once people are comfortable with using the tool and actually knowing exactly what to do. And that can also potentially reduce your workload as, being the kind of administrators of Power BI potentially.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? I know we are a little bit over time, but if we have questions, you can ask them if you like. If not, we are at the end of our session, and I would thank you, Asgeir, for his presentation and the nice discussion afterwards. And